Husbands and wives that got divorced after 20 years of marriage. What made you decide to change your mind after all that time? Story 1. Didn't get divorced but started the process after about 25 years. Stuck it out for a few more years for the kids and ended up falling in love with her after the kids moved out. Relationships follow cycles. So glad I stuck it out. Story 2. My husband began surreptitiously going to strip clubs. He stole about $200 a week from various accounts and a business I owned to fund these activities. He lost his job because he went there so often at lunch and would just stay. We had young kids, and so I stayed after he got some therapy. He was never nest with the therapist. About a year ago, I learned he was doing it again. Plus, texting strippers. My youngest kid graduates high school this year. I've done what's best for everyone else for 20 years now. This September was 21 years. I don't anticipate having a 22nd anniversary. It's really scary to think of being alone. I don't hate him. I feel sorry for him. I know he will feel very sad and lonely when I'm gone. But being near him feels like having my soul ripped from my body every day. Story 3. My parents split up after nearly 30 years. My dad was in my entire life, so when they finally divorced when I was 18, there was no surprise. He'd been cheating for years, and I think he was the one W finally asked for it. I think my mom stayed because she couldn't afford to start over. She spent her life putting my dad through school and wasn't educated herself. She had no family or anyone W could help her either. There was definitely some confidence issues on her part too. Story 4. Therapy changed my mind. After more than a decade of being miserable, I finally got help. When I was able to really talk about my marriage was when I realized that I needed to get the out. At the end of the day, I stayed in a Thai marriage because the thought of being alone scared me. Through therapy, I was clued into many wonderfully supportive friends and family members I had if I just reached out to them. I wasn't going to be in a relationship anymore, but I wasn't alone either. Story 5. My dad had multiple affairs and my mom got tired of it. There was also alcoholism and both parents were workaholics. My dad remarried a lovely woman and so did my mom. Oh, that may have been an issue too. Edit. Gold? Thank you, kind stranger. Story 6. We were together for 20 years, married for 15. We started as high school sweethearts, but we eventually realized that we weren't the same people we were when we fell in love. We also realized that that wasn't going to change. We decided that the best way for everyone to be happy for the rest of our lives was to end it on peaceful terms before we were both 70 and resentful of each other for trapping each other in an unhappy marriage for 40+ years. Story 7. Not me, but my grandmother once told me that she was considering divorcing her husband of over 50 years. The reason she gave me was, we stayed together for the kids. Now the kids are all grown up and have lives of their own. And now I can't ignore the small things about him, my grandpa, that annoy me. She didn't go through with it, but she seemed sincere when she said it. It broke my heart, especially since I only ever saw the best side of him. Edit. Thank you for the silver, kind stranger. Story 8. Obligatory, not me, my parents. My dad filed for divorce after 25 years of marriage. My mom was sacked. My dad was absolutely miserable, but the signs of a failed marriage were always present. My dad is very emotional and is quick to anger. He never really handled failure very effectively and would be mad instead of constructive. My mom very family-oriented and was adamant that we never move her than 40 miles from Chicago. Hell, when I was going away to college, she bawled to my dad to force me to go to a school closer to me. In a way, I think my dad resented my mom for never letting him travel or get away from Chicago. It also doesn't help that I'm fairly certain my mom became, undiagnosed, depressed once her mom died. All she would do was do her bare minimum at her job, a school bus driver, come me and sleep, finish her route for the day, cook a hamburger helper meal for the family, and then play Angry S on her iPad. It's really weird seeing your parents divorce in your 20s. You're adult enough to speak candidly, and neither of them likes what you have to say about them during or after the fact. The silver lining out of it is my sisters, and I know W not to behave in a relationship. Story 9. I worked at a law firm that only practiced family law, divorces, child custody, wills and estates, etc. At one time, we had like 8 clients getting divorced after 20+ years of marriage, and they were all high-ranking military men. BUSC wives came out of the closet after all their kids had grown up and moved out of the use, and the guys were getting ready to retire. I thought it was so weird, but I guess for whatever reason, the women thought that their duties to their husbands and families were coming to an end, and they wanted to live for themselves. I guess I know why they couldn't come out 30 years ago. It was a different time, but I was curious why they were all attracted to military guys. Maybe because it meant their husbands would be away for years at a time during their service? Story 10. Not myself, but my parents. They were married for 22 years when they separated, 24 years by the time the divorce was final. From the perspective of a child in the situation, there was no way that they were happy people together. There was hardly ever a quiet moment in the use because of my father's temper, but my mother knew W to serve it back too. However, the final straw was more of a chain of events. My father had a very rigid view of the family. Man works, woman stays me, cares for the me and children. When I was in high school, my father got injured at work and needed surgery. He worked a physically demanding job and would be out for 6 months. My mother, knowing that we were already falling behind on vehicle and use payments, decided to find part-time employment. She worked while the kids were in school. It was still important to her to see her kids get on the bus and be there when they got me. My father immediately believed that she was cheating on him. He installed a tracker and tape recorder in her car. He sweat up at her workplace and caused a scene multiple times. He questioned her co-workers. He spent most of time at the use drinking. This was not an equal partnership, and it really never was. You sort of seen W asterisk hurt asterisk he acted when my mom finally asked for a divorce. But he rebounded real quick. All he had to do was tell some woman on Plenty of Fish his sob story, and he moved right into her use. He spent a couple of years treating her and her children ribly before she kicked him out. Only took him a couple of weeks in a tell to find asterisk another asterisk woman to let him move in. Story 11. There's a guy in my town that everyone knows about because he owns this huge mansion in a middle CL neighborhood. Apparently, he was married to a woman for a long time, but she left him calling him a loser because his business hadn't taken off yet. After she left him, his business finally took off. He sells medical equipment to Spittles, and he became U levels of rich in a few years. The reason he built the mansion in that neighborhood was because that is where she lives, so she has to drive by the mansion on her way to work every day. Story 12. My parents got divorced after 22 years of marriage. They were never in love and didn't even like each other. They had me and then my sister a few years later and wanted to stay together for the kids. 12 years after I was born, they had my brother, and that kept the cycle going. I wish I could say they are happy now, but they still like to cause trouble for each other. We're due with our first child soon, and they're going to have to figure out W to be grandparents together. Thankfully, I'm 1,500 miles from them, so it won't be a headache often. Story 13. Parents divorced after 25 years when my mom had what we taught at the time was a midlife crisis. She told my dad by draining $3K from the joint checking account to fund her divorce lawyer. 6 years later, they were officially divorced since she blew through that money on different lawyers that kept firing her as a client. We later ruled out midlife crisis when her behavior started to become more odd, erratic, and paranoid. She was in her early 50s when this behavior started. Now we, myself and my sister-in-law with psychology experience, think she has late-onset bipolar. And I say think, since we can't get her officially diagnosed since she believes nothing is wrong with her. She lives in NY, and it is super hard to commit someone there unless they are a danger to themselves or other people. She's not dangerous, just can't LD down a job and lives in her car due to her own insubordinate, sporadic, paranoid behavior, but blames everyone else. No, she's not a narcissist, just mentally ill since she was never like this when we were growing up. She was very selfless and caring when she was younger. Edit. Hi Redditors, thanks for sharing all your stories. I'm sorry if I couldn't respond to everyone. Ironically, I was just fielding my mom's texts and calls about her most recent job firing. This morning on my birthday, IP Everyone W shared a story has an easier time going forward, since that's what IP this new year brings us as a family. Story 14. My parents got divorced because of my dad. We grew up in a military family. Dad was always deployed. My mom is a walking medical disaster. No offense to her. RA at 23, endometriosis at 24, got a hysterectomy and everything. They married early and had kids really early because of the endometriosis. My mom tried to cater to my dad, make sure he could still live his life in his 20s because they had kids earlier than expected. Well, being deployed all the time meant my dad could just around with ladies off in other places. My mom stayed me and took care of us. Dad gets a divorce when he gets back, gets remarried like 3 months later. That lasted like 2 years before she got her green card and ditched him. My mom still loves him despite him moving on to his third marriage, having another kid, and never actually paying his portion of child support. So, pretty much they got divorced so my dad could have a younger, more subservient wife. Story 15. Not me, but a lady I worked with. Her and her husband had been married for almost 30 years. They had 2 kids, both in their mid-late teens, and a full life together. She was the stay-at-me mom, he made the big bucks, etc. Anyways, once the kids both started to grow up and stop wanting to go to the cottage, they realized that when left alone together, they didn't have much in common. Then the kids started leaving for school, and I guess things got worse. I think everything would have been fine if not for the father's dad, the grandfather, getting sick. Turns out the old man had near $4 million to his name and was giving it all to the father. So, dad consults a lawyer. W says that since it's an inheritance, if he's divorced before he gets it, he can keep all of it. And as such, he divorces her within days. She stopped working for us certainly after, but I know it was pretty hard on her. She got her fair shake of the currently owned ETS, but couldn't touch the $4 mil. Story 16, 23 years. I had lied to her several times over the years, and she always forgave me. The last time I lied to her about accruing a severe amount of debt due to a gambling addiction. I think she might have forgiven the lie, but she couldn't forgive the addiction and the chance I'd start gambling again. I started attending Gamblers Anonymous after I told her, but it was too little too late for her. On the plus side, I haven't gambled in almost 3 years. Edit. I wanted to thank everyone for the support. It was a struggle at first, but it gets easier as long as I take it one day at a time. I've made some amazing friends in my local recovery community, and I run a meeting once a week to help others that are suffering. Story 17. I will be one of the few that speaks from experience. I have been married 20 years, and we are on the edge. The answer is that life changes you. When you start out, the relationship is its own thing. It is cultivated and grows. Then over the years, add some children and full-time jobs, and there is less time to cultivate, or none. You end up becoming life partners to run the household and wonder why you are even together. Since there are no good times, all that is left are arguments and bad times. This is all normal, and on top of that, you are both going through the personal struggles of living. To be nest, staying married is tougher than most people think in an age with divorce social stigma. The kids do keep you together. Ping someone you can rekindle something that once existed. And this is in a situation with two good people trying to do the right thing and not a toxic situation with abuse. Story 18. My grandparents initiated divorce proceedings a month after my dad, the youngest of his siblings, graduated college. They had stayed together to provide a stable me for their children, and once they'd all left the nest, my grandparents were ready to move on. Story 19. Ib 4. Not my story, my grandparents. They met and married in the 50s, super Catholic family, 6 kids in 9 years, thereabouts. Husband worked, wife took care of the family dynamic. It was Nestle, a lot of little things that my grandma eventually got tired of. First, it was trying to wrangle her 3 boys, all with difficult personalities, to church, so they stopped going. Then it was things like not helping with the difficult kids, women's work, not helping with Usold Krez, that's what kids are for, being emotionally distant. He's a man, they don't do emotional, etc. From the way my grandma tells it, she stuck it out so long because she taught that's what a good Catholic woman does. Be long-suffering and patient. It wasn't until she started exploring outside Catholicism that she decided she'd suffered long enough. The divorce ended up being civil and mutual. Grandpa was never one for causing a scene. And both my grandparents ended up in loving, understanding second relationships, neither remarried officially. Funny random side note. When I graduated high school in 2012, my mother invited both my grandparents to my graduation. By that time, they'd been divorced for longer than they'd been married, 20-odd years together, 30-plus years divorced by my math, and didn't even recognize each other until after the ceremony. Story 20. Had to watch my parents go through the paperwork to get divorced after my dad had a MIV stroke and was forced to retire. It was the only way for them to keep the money from his pension and maintain his health insurance coverage. My parents got a divorce of convenience, so Pops could make the mortgage payments and get his insulin. Thankfully, my parents' insurance agent is a close friend and found every possible form and loophole so they could stay in the use together. It took almost 2 years to get everything settled. I'll never forget my dad's statement after it was all done. The church still says we're married, and that's what matters to us. At least now your mother can still get her hearing aids and pay the mortgage if something happens to me. I was so disgusted with it all. I never forgave my dad's union for it, and we now make sure someone from our family shows up to their annual open meeting when they discuss the health insurance plan to shame them in explicit detail with W the board S over the roughnecks. Story 21. My parents were together for 24 years. My dad left my mom after his best friend, W was 6 years younger than him, died. My dad went into a depression about his own life and left my mom for some at his work because he felt he was missing out on life by being with my mom. Story 22. He killed the dog. She was getting older, and if left alone for more than 7 hours, she would pee in the basement on the cement. I would check daily and mop if needed, but we were in the process of burying a new use, and he decided she wasn't coming with us. Rather than discussing with me, he took the easy route and made her disappear while I was at work. Having to console my young sons that evening, and seeing their trauma was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. My heart closed to him instantly. Story 23. Not 20 years of marriage, only 16, but 21 years together with my ex. We both had a non-loving me situation, so maybe this drove us together. We bought our first use when we were 3 years together, and since then, there was always the fear of being left alone. Leave the other one and myself in debts. We bought a second me, sold the first one. Had kids, lovely twin daughters. Bought a third me, sold the second one. But my wife still wasn't happy with life, and this all pushed down on me. There was no affection between us. Also, I was very insecure about myself, taught women didn't really like me, but then my eyes opened. I started doing yoga, went to a therapist, and after a year or two, I felt secure enough to make this really heavy decision. The toughest part was for my daughters. 9 years then. I really quickly met someone new, and after her, someone else. So my complexes about my looks are completely gone. I started a new life. My kids are okay with it now. It was the hardest but best decision in my life. Also, my ex had it really hard. She didn't see it coming, although she told me several times she wanted to divorce. She blamed me for everything. But now she also has someone new. Mutual friends are telling me she is happy. So I think for her this was good after all. Story 24. My parents started considering divorce right around that time, but ended up deciding against it. My dad was military and had PTSD from Afghanistan, but it didn't cause problems at me because he was stationed at a base across the state from us, so he was only me on the weekends. When he got restationed and we moved, we all lived in the same use again. His PTSD and my mom's anxiety did not play off of each other well, so they considered divorce, but decided to work through it. Story 25. She cheated for years, plain and simple. Ended our 22-year marriage. TBH, don't even want to work through it. Now that we've separated for a while, I realize toxic she'd become. I'm a much better man with her. Story 26. Not 20 plus, but my parents divorced after 13 years of marriage. They divorced due to my mom's affair, but still continued living together for the kids. We were young when they divorced, but they never moved apart and we all grew up in one household. After they divorced, they lived more like roommates than anything and got along better than they ever did as a married couple. They still shared all expenses relating to us, and since my dad made more, he would spot her often. I can't remember them having a single argument after the divorce happened. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer this year, my dad was her caretaker. He would drive her to appointments, change her bandages every 3 days, cook her meals. When we went out, he would go grab the car so she wouldn't have to walk too far. When she was stuck in the spittle, he visited her every day. When she died 2 months ago, he paid for her entire funeral. He was her ex-husband that she cheated on, and he still gave her everything. Divorce was probably the best thing they could have done yet. In a lot of ways, they were still married. It taught me a lot about the importance of caring for another person when they really need you, even when they've hurt you badly. My dad did so much for my mom despite his own feelings. It also taught me a lot about making a bad sicey doesn't make you a bad person. My mother made a mistake, yet she was the greatest woman I've ever known. I'm insanely lucky to have called her my mom. We had an incredibly unusual me life, but I wouldn't change it for anything. Story 27, 28 years, and I lost him to mental illness. I tried for years to get him help, but he refused. He is a genuinely good person and was once an amazing husband and father. I have been divorced over 2 years and still haven't dated anyone because no one will ever compare to the man he was. Smart, romantic, thoughtful, socially conscious, hard worker, etc. That man doesn't exist anymore. I am the one sought the divorce, but expected him to want to work it out. When he said, "I think that's for the best," I was heartbroken. He lives upstairs from me because where would he go? I can't just toss him to the streets, but it does make it harder. I feel more like a widow TBH. Story 28. I see a fair amount of these divorces get filed by older folks because one of them has dementia or the like and needs to be moved into a care facility. The couple will file for divorce in order to protect the family ETS from getting completely eaten up, and Medicaid takes over the brunt of it. It is pretty sad that our healthcare state is such that it is necessary to take such a step to make sure someone gets the care that they need without destroying the other spouse's ability to care for themselves. Story 29. We were together for 20 years, but only married for 13 of them. Our interests just diverged over the years. I got more into music and art, wanted to go to festivals and such, and she wanted to her boss. I'm very grateful our attempts to have kids failed. It's much, much easier to make a clean break that way. Story 30. My mom left my dad on their 30th wedding anniversary. He had been in and out of rehab 3 times at that point and could not commit to quitting drinking. She couldn't stay and watch him drink himself to death anymore. Story 31. This is a post about my parents. My parents divorced when I was in my early 30s after more than 3 decades of being married. My parents still speak to one another, and when my parents are in a city with their former in-laws, they make it a point to visit TSE in-laws. My parents started dating when my mom was 14 and my dad was 16, and both sides of my family would gather regularly during the Lie Days when both sets of my grandparents were still alive. I love both of my parents, and I speak to both of them semi-regularly. With that being said, this is going to be a very one-sided point of view in favor of my mom. I'm sure my mom has her own portion of the blame, but from my point of view, my dad LDS more of the responsibility. My dad was always a difficult person. His humor is CR, but he was and still is always helping people when he can. In 2004, he had a cerebral hemorrhage. We weren't sure he was going to survive. First, the doctors said if he survived, he'd be a vegetable. Then, as his healing progressed, the outcome steadily got better. What didn't get better was him being in. During his years of recovery, my mother tried her best, but during this time, we lost our 2 businesses and the me they built. My dad blamed my mom for all of this, and when she had had enough of taking his blame, she left him. Story 32. My mom filed for divorce after 27 years with my dad. Us kids were out of the use, and I think she had a midlife crisis, thinking that if she decided to do nothing, then that's W she'd die. In that use, doing nothing but things that make the days go by faster. I do believe an old high skull flame helped her make the decision as well. At first I was hurt, but as I get older now, I completely get why. My dad prefers routine over excitement, and had a habit of saving us poor when we didn't need to. At first it was a financial requirement, then it became obsession. My mom wanted to travel and experience new things in her later years. She deserves that, and my dad deserves to live he wants to too. Today I see 2 happier people, and that makes me happy. Story 33. My parents intended to separate after 20 or so years. Once my sister and I left the ME. Mom got sick and dad cares for her. They live almost completely separate lives in the same use. I check in their daily BC of my own marriage having gone south and financially ruining me. Story 34. A few months SRT'd of 20 when we separated. It was never a healthy marriage to begin with. Found myself always trying to keep the peace. He was gone a lot, so that helped. The arguments had become bad, but when one of the kids really started struggling, I knew I had to make a CIC. I CSE my child, and the really started to fly. Then I found out about the multiple affairs. So while I was busting my trying to keep things going, he was pretending to be a family man to the outside world and doing whatever behind the scenes. I can spot personality disorders a mile away now. Story 35, 47 years of marriage, and my wife went off the rails, screaming at me hundreds of times, finally getting me imprisoned in the intake room of the mental health ward in the Spittle. Came back me after 48 hours, to no car, no dog, and a note saying, can't take anymore. Of what? So at 71, I am alone. Her family does not believe me, and I spent Thanksgiving and Christmas by myself for the first time since we married in 1972. My only PE is that there are more women than men at my age. Apparently, a lot of men die in their 60s. Story 36. I was married to a wonderful woman for 27 years. 1 daughter, a perfect little family. Then I had an affair, and it broke her heart. We are still good friends, and I see her at least once a week, but I wish I could go back and undo the terrible damage I did. Now I'm 60, I live alone, and all I have left are memories and regrets. Story 37. Only one needs to decide he or she is out. After 20 years, it's not hey, we really made a mistake kind of moment. It's more often a buildup of resentment and unresolved issues leading to infidelity or some large unresolvable issue. At least that's what happened to me. Sadly, divorcing as the children are about to leave the me is the worst on the children, as they don't have time to adjust before leaving the nest. This according to my therapist. Esther Perel has some great books and YouTube videos on marriage that are very relevant. I love her irrshin. Most people go through 2 or 3 marriages, sometimes to the same people. This recognizes that people grow and change, and this is okay. Story 38. He was a serial cheater. The straw that broke the camel's back was my then 15-year-old daughter having a panic attack and being spitalized over the guilt she felt for keeping his secret. He had been having an affair with a married woman for a year and had been taking our kids with him to play use with her and her kids, while her husband was out of state for work in the oil field. He was using his dying grandfather as cover by claiming to be staying overnights in the Spittle with him so he wouldn't be alone, and that he was taking our kids with him so they could go meet with his mother and get to spend time with their grandparents on that side. He threatened our kids and guilted them into keeping it a secret until my daughter just couldn't handle it anymore. She told me. He called her a lying and a stupid, and when she ran to her bedroom to get away from him screaming at her, he chased her and kicked her bedroom door down to get at her for telling. I put him out of my use immediately and divorced him. Also, his entire family knew what he was doing and kept up the sleeping in the spittle with dying grandpa cover for him. He had been taking this woman and her kids to his family functions, and they all welcomed them with open arms. His mother went so far as to also verbally attack my daughter when she told and called her a liar and accused her of stirring up drama for the attention. Story 39. I can only speak for my dad as I am not married, and he is not a computer guy. But my parents' relationship ended after 20-ish years because my mother cheated on my father a second time. The first time was before I was born, and he tried to make it work because my sister was born already, but he never trusted her after that initial infidelity. They stayed together until I was 14, when my mother cheated again and basically said it and walked out of all our lives. I'd say my father came out on top there because he's happier with her and he still regularly sees his children, whereas my mother sees my sisters maybe twice a year and rarely sees me at all. Story 40. My wife's sister's husband is leaving her after nearly 20 years together. He finally got power of attorney to his father's estate, and he doesn't want to share once the guy dies. And he's super old, so. Story 41. I am not in this situation, but from what I have seen, if a couple gets divorced after 20+ years, it's probably because they had drifted apart a long time ago, but stayed together for the sake of providing stability for their kids. Once the youngest either goes to college or gets otherwise established on their own, then the couple is finally free to go their separate ways. It also helps that their kids are all either adults or nearly there, so they may be able to handle their emotions better. Also note that it's not always both halves of a couple come to this realization. Sometimes one half, let's face it, usually the mom, but not always, sticks it out in a tie situation while the other half is oblivious to the harm they are causing, only to drop the bomb once the kids are settled. Story 42. Met 1978, close platonic friends until 1989, married 1990, and he leaves me in 2017. When I asked him why, he replied, "I didn't feel you were my friend anymore." Oh, really? After birthing and raising 2 great kids, after being the main breadwinner for the entire marriage, after letting you take 70% of our ETS in the uncontested divorce, because I was more worried about why you'd get along than I was about whether I would get along, and you think I was not your friend. He was always an idiot, and he still is. He ripped our family apart, and now he's living in a PY little trailer. He started smoking again. He's developed heart disease, karma, and he's inked through his money so fast it's astounding. I'm no longer around to save him from his own stupidity. So basically, for no good reason on earth, he abandoned me and ripped apart our family. His new GF has poor health, is far less attractive, and is basically keeping him on the back burner and stringing him along to make her real BF jealous. And he idolizes this cheating lying. I'm well rid of him, I know, but it was a tough adjustment. It's human nature to yearn for the familiar, even when it's an abusive situation. I'm struggling with loneliness and with adjusting my entire future. I didn't want to be dating at this age, but sometimes the loneliness gets to be too much. Yes, he was an idiot I'm well rid of, but he was also another person in this now empty use. And it kills me when our kids mention him. They don't know it. I always assure them I love their father, which I do, but I could never take him back. And I encourage their relationship with him. On the inside, I want to take them and shake them and scream, "W, can you still associate with this loser? W tore our family to shreds? W has made certain there'll never be another family diner, lighty, or vacation. W abandoned your mother and broke her heart with such cruelty. How can you?" But I never say anything like that, and I never will. It's so complicated. My life is both better and bitter with him. Story 43, Addiction Issues. We called it quits on the day of our 20th wedding anniversary. Son in 8th grade at the time. Leaving him with my wife was the most difficult thing I ever faced, but I had to leave. She made me out to be the bad guy afterward. It's been 12 years now. Son and I have a great relationship. He hasn't spoken to her in 6 years. She remarried in 2012, embarred him badly at the reception, refused to accept responsibility for her atrocious behavior. That was the last straw for him. He's been in therapy for quite a while. It was bad, but staying in that toxic situation will have been worse for all of us. People don't change. If you think your spouse can be a different person after all that time, you're fooling yourself. Story 44. I feel like I see this happen 3 or 4 times a year. I'm a rock climbing instructor at the local YMCA. Every few months, someone will come in, typically middle-aged and alone. They explain they've wanted to learn for years, but never had the time or whatever. Usually they get into it, start climbing 2, 3 times a week, planning outside trips, etc. When they talk about their husband-wife, it's about 50-50ths. They typically aren't condescending or anything. They almost always try, for at least a few weeks, to involve their significant other in their new be-bye. But it doesn't work. After a few months, this person has a WLE new group of friends, has started to eat better and work out regularly. They lose some weight, and you start to notice they've got a new climbing partner, usually one of the same people of the opposite. You start to hear their tone toward their SO change. Now they're just a weight, elding them down. They're never going to get into shape. They're never going to be outgoing. They just want to sit at me and watch TV. Pretty soon, TSE2 are planning their divorces together. I've been at the gym for 7 years now. So, realistically, I've seen this happen about 28 separate times. All the old-timers at the gym start taking bets on long a marriage is going to last about a week after someone over 35 SU is up. Story 45. She realized that she never truly loved me, and that she was a lesbian in love with one of our oldest friends. 24 years together, 19 years of marriage, 2 kids, pets, cars, friends in common, all got thrown up in the air. She wanted to leave, and I was the one trying to keep our family together. Frustratingly painful. Maybe I always had been? She left one night, and suddenly I was a single father explaining the harshness of life to my crying children and trying to convince them everything would be okay. She started the legal process, and I reluctantly had to participate. It is difficult to get divorced and not let it become ugly once the process starts. The children end up right in the middle of it all, spectators oblivious to the plays being called, but clearly watching the game play out on the field whether we realize it or not. Parenting plans lead to visitations and kids wishing things were the way they used to be. You learn to be an individual again, and it's absolutely terrifying at first. But it leads to, at least in my case, realization that more life awaits with people who genuinely want to be part of it with you. I don't wish divorce on anyone, especially when children are in the families. The emotional scars run deep and never truly heal. I will champion my children to discover where they are first and to do what they love to do. I now think most people get married too early in life, and it leads to regret and longing for opportunities missed for some.